Let's be honest, grading is a pretty tricky thing. So in this video, I'd like to discuss how we think about grading in your Japanese class. School and grades seem to go hand in hand, but it's often a little confusing as to how you actually get a grade and what that grade actually means. And I'd like to show you in our Japanese classes that grades mean something pretty specific. Let's talk about what grading is and is not. First thing you need to understand is that grading is a process. It is step by step by step. It's all the little stages that allow you to understand where you're heading and how far along you are on that journey. It's a partnership. It's one that you and I will build, but it's also one that you're going to build with your classmates because it is a social endeavor, language learning, and you will build partnerships around this. It is also empowering. You know that you've accomplished something and you have that feeling at the end of what you've done and all the work that went into it. It's a wonderful thing. What it's not is an endpoint. It's not the final thing, oh, I got a B, we're done. It's supposed to be informative about how well you did on something so that you know what to do next, and it's a continuous process. It's not punitive. It's not something that you should feel punished for or be nervous about, because it is actually about you and how well you're doing in relationship to the goals that I set for you. It is also not points. You need to stop thinking about how many points something is worth. It's about your learning of the Japanese language. Is not about accruing points. That is not learning. Get the point? Let's talk about the kinds of assessments that you'll have in Japanese class. The first category are your informal assessments. These are anything from classwork or homework to the things you'll do in groups or pair work observations that I make, chats with me, participation in class, bell ringers or exit slips. These are all the little things that I use to observe how well you're progressing in your language growth and are often not found in the gradebook itself. But the next category, or the more formal assessments, are things that end up in the gradebook. We have a formative assessment called little assessments. They're essentially quizzes. We call them LAs in Japanese class. And they're the building blocks of your language growth. They're super important to understand how to do the skills of a little assessment because they build up to the summatives. And the summatives are at the end of a learning period, often the quarter, and they do represent what you're able to hold on to for several weeks at a time as your language is growing. All right, now let's have a quiz, a pop quiz. What? Gotcha. That's exactly what assessment should not be and what you're not going to find in our Japanese class. Understanding the modes of communication are crucial to understanding how language works. We have three modes of communication, the first being interpretive. In the older ways of thinking about language, we think of this as the listening and the reading. But what this means is when information is going from the outside in, so you're looking at reading something or listening to something to understand it. The second mode is presentational, which is the output version, where you have Japanese in your head and you're either going to write it down for someone to understand or you're going to say it for someone to understand. And then the last is the interpersonal mode. The interpersonal is kind of a mixture of both of those. It's usually going to be speaking and listening, but it's spontaneous and it's non-scripted and it's a conversation. It's talking to each other. So now's the part where we actually talk about things that end up in your gradebook, the formal assessments. And they are in all three modes that we just reviewed. We're going to talk about the LA scale or the confidence level scale. This is for your little assessments. These are not points. They are levels of proficiency, and a 4 is the top level. A 4 would be represented as a 97% as the grade, and it's a range of understanding of that point. And it means I've got this now and I've got it in the future. I've done a really good job with my preparations and I'm not just cramming it in, and I'm going to hold on to it. Whereas a 3 is you're solid. You know you could do a little bit more, but you've got the skill down. And you're making some errors, but they're not so critical that we have concerns about them. A 2 is where you start to get into a little bit of a worrying zone. You're not there yet, but generally you know what you need to do, and you likely need just more time with the study to deepen your confidence level and be able to perform it a little more solidly. And that's represented with a 73%. Whereas a 1 is danger zone. You do not want to be in the 1 category very often. And if you are, it's not the end of the world, but you do need to get help. This is likely a situation that is going to require some conferencing with sensei. So if you do get a 1 or a 2 on an LA, it doesn't mean that you have to panic, but you do have to ask the reason why you might have gotten that 1 or a 2. And it usually boils down to one of 3 reasons. First reason being, did you know what you were being asked to do? And that's a result of looking at the syllabus. The syllabus holds all the information you need to understand what's being asked of you, so always go to the syllabus. Second reason would be that you didn't put in enough time into the study sessions themselves. 1 or 2 times just often isn't enough to get the information deeply and firmly into your head to be able to produce it. So more practice and more effective practice is a solution. And the third reason might be that what you actually prepared for the assessment was not actually what I asked of you. If you're not so sure about the modes of communication, for example, you might have been practicing for an interpretive assessment by looking at words and trying to understand what they meant, but what I was asking of you was to produce the words, which is a presentational mode of assessment. So those could all be reasons that you weren't successful. And the good news is that you have a whole week to retake that assessment, and you get full credit for that better attempt. So it is well worth your time and effort to learn the material well. It's not only great for your grade, but it will help you understand the material better. If you do wait too long, your scores are averaged, so you want to jump on that opportunity as soon as possible. Now I'd like to show you a graphic representation of the importance of mastering your LAs. If in quarter 1 you get a 4 on an assessment and another 4, and then you get a 3, you're doing just fine, but then you get that 1 and you don't do anything about it. It's almost like a gap in your knowledge that sits there as a big hole, so that when in quarter 2 you're piling on more knowledge, you might get a 2, an underdeveloped assessment, where you're not so secure with the material. And you start to see how when you put something on top of something else that isn't very developed or non-existent, you're going to have a very unstable structure, and that's representing the language, and that you really don't have much to build on if the foundations aren't solid. So you need to understand LAs and do well on them to be successful as the years pass on. Answer me this: what are formative, weekly, and retakeable LAs? These are the foundational pieces of the course, which lead to the summative at the end of a grading period, and not retakeable assessments, the big assessments. And those are where you need to hold on to the information for longer periods of time. And here's where I present how your grade will break down. It's by the modes of communication: 30%, 30%, 30%, interpretive, presentational, and interpersonal modes. That 90% of your grade is represented by assessment, which means you need to learn the language. 5% is classwork or homework. It's usually a weekly graded assignment, and 5% e-portfolio, which I will create a separate video on because it is super important and worth its own space. Big assessments are going to be worth 2 times as many as any suite of LAs in each of the different modes.